22 years. That's how long Daniel Hartley spent in a cage for a murder that never happened. Not a murder he didn't commit. No, that would be too simple. A murder that literally never happened. The victim? Alive. Walking around, living her life in another state while Daniel rotted in a 6x8 cell, counting the cracks in the ceiling, watching his youth disappear one grey morning at a time. This is the story of how the American justice system convicted a man of killing someone who wasn't dead, and how one stubborn public defender, a DNA test, and a Facebook photo brought the whole thing crashing down. Let's go back to 1999. Clinton was president, Y2K panic was building, and in the small town of Ridgewood, Louisiana, a 23-year-old mechanic named Daniel Hartley was about to have the worst night of his life. Daniel wasn't anyone special. I don't mean that as an insult. He'd probably tell you the same thing. He fixed cars at his uncle's shop, drank beer with his buddies on weekends, and had an on-again, off-again relationship with a woman named Michelle Torres. Michelle was complicated. Beautiful, sure, the kind of beautiful that makes men stupid. But she was also troubled. Drugs, mostly. Meth had hit rural Louisiana hard in the 90s, and Michelle had fallen into it deep. Their relationship was toxic. Everyone knew it. They'd fight, break up, get back together, fight again. The neighbours had called the cops twice that year alone. Nothing serious. Shouting matches, a broken window once, but enough to establish a pattern. Enough to make Daniel the obvious suspect when Michelle disappeared. October 15th, 1999. Michelle's mother called the police. Said she hadn't heard from her daughter in 4 days. Said Michelle was supposed to come by for her nephew's birthday and never showed. Now, 4 days isn't usually enough to launch a full investigation. Adults disappear all the time. They go on benders, they run off with new boyfriends. They need space. But the detective assigned to the case, a man named Richard Brennan, had a theory. And Detective Brennan didn't like Daniel Hartley. See, Brennan had responded to one of those domestic disturbance calls 6 months earlier. He'd seen Daniel, angry, drunk, shouting at Michelle in the driveway. And he'd made up his mind right then. That boy's gonna kill her someday, he reportedly told his partner. Just watch. So when Michelle vanished, Brennan didn't investigate. He built a case. There's a difference, and it matters. When you investigate, you follow the evidence wherever it leads. You consider multiple possibilities. You let the facts tell the story. When you build a case, you start with a conclusion and work backward. You find evidence that supports what you already believe, and you ignore, or bury, anything that doesn't fit. Detective Brennan was a builder. Within 2 weeks, he had Daniel arrested. The charges? First-degree murder. The evidence? Let me tell you about the evidence. 1. Daniel and Michelle had a volatile relationship. True, but not proof of murder. 2. A witness, Michelle's neighbour, claimed she heard screaming the night Michelle disappeared. She couldn't identify voices, couldn't say what was said, just screaming. 3. Traces of Michelle's blood were found in Daniel's truck. A few drops on the passenger seat. 4. Daniel had no alibi. He claimed he was home alone, watching TV. No one could confirm it. 5. And this is the big one. A jailhouse informant named Curtis Webb claimed Daniel confessed to him. Said Daniel told him he took care of Michelle and put her somewhere no one would find her. No body. No murder weapon. No forensic evidence of violence. Just a theory, some blood drops, and the word of a man who would say anything to reduce his own sentence. The trial lasted 6 days. Daniel's public defender was overworked, underpaid, and juggling 40 other cases. He did what he could, but what he could do wasn't enough. The prosecution painted a picture. A jealous boyfriend, a turbulent relationship, a woman who threatened to leave for good, and a man who snapped. Michelle Torres is dead, the prosecutor told the jury in his closing argument. We may never find her body. Daniel Hartley made sure of that. But absence of a body does not mean absence of justice. The evidence tells us what happened. Michelle is gone, and this man is responsible. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. Guilty. Daniel Hartley, 23 years old, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For killing a woman who was, at that very moment, living in a trailer park in Amarillo, Texas. Let me pause here, because I know what you're thinking. How? How does this happen? How does someone get convicted of murder without a body, without solid evidence, without anyone actually proving the victim is dead? It happens more than you'd think. In America, you can be convicted of murder without a body. It's called a no-body murder case, and while they're difficult to prosecute, they're not impossible. The prosecution just has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the victim is dead and the defendant killed them. The problem is, reasonable doubt is subjective. It depends on the jury, on the judge, on how good the lawyers are, on how much the community wants someone to pay for a crime. Ridgewood wanted someone to pay. Michelle was a local girl. Her family was known. Her mother sat in the front row of the courtroom every single day, crying, clutching a photo of her daughter. And Daniel? Daniel was just the mechanic with a temper who everybody knew would snap someday. The system didn't fail Daniel Hartley. The system worked exactly as it was designed. It just wasn't designed for people like him. Prison changes a man. Not in the way movies show it. Daniel didn't become hardened, didn't join a gang, didn't transform into some cold-eyed killer. He just shrank. The first year, he filed appeals, wrote letters, contacted journalists, begged anyone who would listen. No one listened. The second year, he stopped writing. By year 5, he barely spoke at all. His mother visited every month until she died of a stroke in 2006. His father had left when he was young. His sister moved to California and started a new life, one that didn't include monthly trips to a maximum security prison. Daniel became a ghost, a man serving a life sentence for a crime that existed only in the imagination of one determined detective. But here's the thing about ghosts. Sometimes they haunt the right people. 2018. A young public defender named Amanda Chen was reviewing old cases from the Ridgewood district. Not for any particular reason. She was new, ambitious, and believed that somewhere in those dusty files were people who deserved a second look. She found Daniel's case on a Wednesday afternoon. No body, she muttered, flipping through the trial transcript. No murder weapon, no forensic evidence, just a jailhouse snitch and some blood drops. She'd seen weak cases before, but this one felt different. This one felt wrong. She requested the evidence files. What she found made her sick. The blood in Daniel's truck. It had never been DNA tested. In 1999, DNA testing was expensive, and the prosecution decided it wasn't necessary. They had Michelle's blood type, matched the stains in the truck. Good enough. But blood type isn't DNA. Millions of people share the same blood type. And in 2018, DNA testing had become cheap, fast, and devastating to old convictions. Amanda filed a motion to test the blood. The state fought it. Of course they did. A wrongful conviction would mean lawsuits, investigations, careers destroyed. But Amanda was stubborn. And she had something the original public defender didn't have: time, resources, and a judge who believed in science. The motion was granted. The results came back 6 weeks later. The blood in Daniel's truck wasn't Michelle's. It wasn't even female. The DNA belonged to a man named Jorge Mendez, a friend of Daniel's who'd cut his hand helping Daniel move a transmission 3 weeks before Michelle disappeared. Jorge Mendez. Who had told police this exact thing during the original investigation? Whose statement was buried in the file, never shown to the defense, never mentioned at trial? Detective Brennan knew. He knew the blood might not be Michelle's, and he hid it. But here's where the story gets truly insane. Amanda Chen wasn't satisfied. Proving the blood wasn't Michelle's was huge, but it wasn't enough. It didn't prove Michelle was alive. It didn't prove Daniel was innocent. So she did something no one had done in 19 years. She looked for Michelle Torres. Really looked. Not through official channels. The police had declared Michelle dead. Case closed, move on. Amanda used social media. Facebook, Instagram, those people search websites that feel vaguely illegal but aren't. And on a Sunday night, eating cold pizza in her apartment, she found her. Michelle Torres, 52 years old, living in Austin, Texas, working at a grocery store. Profile picture showing her smiling, holding a grandchild. Alive. Undeniably, impossibly, cruelly alive. Amanda's hands were shaking when she made the call. "Is this Michelle Torres? Michelle Torres from Ridgewood, Louisiana?" A long pause. Then, "Who's asking?" "My name is Amanda Chen. I'm a public defender, and I need to ask you something very important." "Is this about Daniel?" Amanda nearly dropped the phone. "You know about Daniel?" "I heard he went to prison years ago for killing me, supposedly." Michelle's voice was flat, tired, like she'd rehearsed this conversation in her head 1,000 times. "I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I was using back then, running from a lot of things. I figured it would sort itself out." "Sort itself out?" Amanda couldn't keep the anger from her voice. "He's been in prison for 19 years. For your murder. For killing you." Silence. "I didn't think they'd actually convict him." "Let me sit with that for a second." "I didn't think they'd actually convict him." This woman knew. For 19 years she knew an innocent man was in prison for killing her. And she did nothing, said nothing, because she figured it would sort itself out. I'm not here to judge Michelle Torres. Actually, no, I am. I absolutely am. But I'm also here to tell you what happened next, because Michelle, to her minimal credit, agreed to cooperate. She provided DNA samples. She signed affidavits. She agreed to testify in court that she was, in fact, alive. Turns out it's pretty hard to maintain a murder conviction when the victim walks into the courtroom. The hearing was set for March 2019. Daniel Hartley, now 53 years old, was brought from his cell in shackles. He'd spent 22 years in prison. His hair was grey, his shoulders were stooped. He walked with a shuffle that comes from decades of moving through small spaces. And when he saw Michelle sitting in the witness box, really saw her, alive, breathing, older but unmistakably her, he broke. Not dramatically, not with screaming or accusations or rage. He just crumpled, put his head in his hands, and wept. 22 years of silence, of isolation, of being told he was a monster, of being treated as a killer. All of it released in one moment. The judge called a 30-minute recess. When they resumed, the prosecutor, a young woman who hadn't even been alive when Daniel was convicted, stood up and said 5 words. "The state moves to dismiss." That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of what had been done, just a procedural statement that erased 2 decades of hell. Daniel Hartley walked out of that courtroom, a free man. But freedom isn't the same as healing. What happened to everyone else? Detective Richard Brennan had retired in 2010. He was 74 when Daniel was exonerated. There were calls for criminal charges, prosecutorial misconduct, evidence tampering, civil rights violations. He was never charged. The statute of limitations had expired on most potential crimes, and the district attorney's office had no appetite for prosecuting one of their own. Brennan released a statement through his lawyer. "I stand by the investigation conducted in 1999. Based on the evidence available at the time, the arrest and prosecution of Daniel Hartley were justified." Based on the evidence he chose to present. Based on the evidence he didn't hide. Curtis Webb, the jailhouse informant who claimed Daniel confessed. He'd been released in 2005 after serving time for drug trafficking. He died of an overdose in 2014, never recanted his testimony, never faced consequences for his lies. Michelle Torres returned to Texas. She wasn't charged with anything. Technically, she hadn't committed a crime. She'd left town, changed her life, kept her head down. The fact that an innocent man suffered for her disappearance, that was apparently nobody's legal problem. Justice in America is not the same as fairness. Daniel filed a lawsuit against the state of Louisiana. Wrongful imprisonment, civil rights violations, 22 years of stolen life. The case settled in 2021 for $4.7 million. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it? 4.7 million. Let's do the math. 22 years, 8,030 days. That's roughly $585 per day of imprisonment for having your name destroyed, for losing your mother while locked in a cage, for missing every birthday, every holiday, every moment of your life from 23 to 53. $585 a day. Would you take that deal? I talked to Daniel. Well, not talked exactly. He did an interview with a local journalist about a year after his release, and I want to share what he said. "People ask me if I'm angry," Daniel said, "and I don't know how to answer. Anger requires energy. It requires believing that someone will care, that something will change. I spent the first 5 years in prison being angry, burning with it, and nobody cared. The system doesn't respond to anger. It just waits until you're too tired to fight anymore. Now, I'm just trying to figure out who I am. I went in at 23. I came out at 53. Everyone I knew has moved on. The world has changed. I don't know how to use half the technology people take for granted. I've never had a smartphone, never used the internet properly, never had a real adult relationship." "Michelle, I don't hate her. I should, probably. But hating her requires me to think about her, and I've spent 22 years doing that. I'm done. She made her choice. She has to live with it. I'm choosing to live without her in my head anymore. The hardest part isn't what I lost. It's knowing I'll never get it back. You can't refund time. You can't return someone's 20s, their 30s, their 40s. They gave me money. They said sorry. Some of them, anyway. But nobody can give me back the life I was supposed to have. So I take it one day at a time. I watch the sunrise because I can. I eat what I want, when I want. I go for walks that don't end at a wall. Small things, stupid things, things everyone else takes for granted. That's freedom. Not what I imagined, but it's mine. There's one more thing. In 2022, Louisiana passed a new law. the Daniel Hartley Act. It requires independent DNA testing in all murder cases where no body is recovered. It mandates the preservation and disclosure of all potentially exculpatory evidence. It creates an oversight board to review convictions based primarily on jailhouse informant testimony. It won't undo what happened to Daniel, but maybe, it'll stop it from happening to someone else. I think about this story a lot, about how easily it could have ended differently. If Amanda Chen hadn't been curious, if she hadn't requested those old files, if she hadn't spent her Sunday night searching Facebook for a woman everyone thought was dead. How many Daniel Hartleys are still in prison right now? Convicted on weak evidence, railroaded by lazy or corrupt investigators, failed by overwhelmed public defenders. The Innocence Project estimates that between 2 and 10% of all prisoners in America are wrongfully convicted. That's potentially tens of thousands of people, sitting in cells, serving sentences for crimes they didn't commit, or crimes that never happened at all. Daniel Hartley got lucky. That's an insane thing to say about a man who lost 22 years of his life. But in the context of the American justice system, he got lucky. He got an Amanda Chen. Most people don't. Daniel lives in New Mexico now. Small house, quiet neighborhood. He works part-time at an animal shelter, taking care of dogs that nobody else wants. They don't judge, he told that journalist. They don't care what you've been accused of, what you've lost, what the world thinks of you. They just want to be loved. And they love you back, unconditionally. Maybe that's what I needed. Something unconditional. Something that doesn't require me to prove my innocence every single day. He paused then, looked out the window, and said something that stayed with me. You know what the worst part is? I still have nightmares. Not about prison, about being arrested. About that moment when the cuffs went on and I knew that nobody was going to believe me, that I was going to lose, no matter what I said. I wake up sometimes, heart pounding, sure that they're coming for me again, that they'll find some other crime I didn't commit, some other victim who isn't dead, and I'll be back in that cell. That fear, I don't think it ever goes away. But I get up anyway. I feed my dogs. I watch the sunrise. I remind myself that I'm free. And I really try to believe it.